Hello, my friends, and welcome back to English Unlocked. You are listening to our Quiet Winter podcast, a space where you can relax, breathe, and let English flow to you softly, gently, without pressure and without rush. My name is Daniel, and today I invite you to step into a calm, peaceful winter evening with me. Before we begin our story, I want you to settle into a comfortable place. Maybe you're walking, maybe you're cooking, maybe you're resting with a warm drink in your hands. Wherever you are, allow yourself to slow down. Let this be your moment. A small pause in a busy world, a quiet breath in the middle of your day. Tonight's story takes us deep into winter. Not the loud winter of storms and traffic and long lines in crowded stores, but a soft, gentle winter. The kind that blankets everything in silence, the kind that makes the world glow under the pale moonlight, the kind that reminds us how beautiful stillness can be. Imagine for a moment a forest covered with fresh snow. Tall pine trees standing quietly in the cold air, their branches heavy with frost. A narrow path winding through the woods, untouched except for a few footprints left earlier in the day. And in the middle of all this quiet white landscape, a small wooden cabin. Warm light spills from its windows. Smoke rises softly from the chimney. Inside, the fire crackles in the fireplace, filling the room with the comforting scent of burning wood, that familiar smell of warmth, safety, and home. This cabin is where our story lives tonight. A place far away from noise, a place where time moves slowly, a place where someone has come to find peace, or maybe to rediscover a part of themselves that got lost in the rush of everyday life. Winter has a way of guiding us back to what matters. When the world outside becomes quiet, it becomes easier to hear our own thoughts. When everything slows down, we finally notice the moments we normally rush past. And that's the feeling I want to bring you into today. A feeling of calm, a feeling of warmth. A feeling of being safe inside a cozy cabin while snow falls softly outside. Over the next few parts of this episode, we will explore a simple winter story. One filled with quiet moments, gentle reflections, and a touch of winter magic that only appears when we allow ourselves to be fully present. So take a slow breath. Let it out gently. And allow your mind to settle into the softness of this moment. When you're ready, we'll step through the cabin door together and begin our winter journey. Before we step fully into the story, I want to take you deeper into the feeling of this winter cabin, into the quiet world surrounding it, into the forest that holds it, into the gentle stillness that shapes everything around it. Imagine the forest at dusk. The sun has just slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a faint glow, a pale, icy blue that stretches across the sky like a soft winter blanket. The air is crisp and cold, but also clean, almost refreshing, as if every breath clears a little space inside your mind. Tall pine trees rise all around you, their branches layered with snow, bending toward the ground with quiet elegance. When the wind moves through them, the snow falls in soft, shimmering waves, not loudly, not suddenly, but gently, like a whisper from the forest itself. There is a path beneath your feet, narrow and winding, marked only by a few footprints left earlier in the day. The snow crunches softly with each step you take, the sound so light it almost blends into the silence. Here, far from the noise of the city, the world feels untouched, pure, peaceful. As you walk deeper into the forest, you notice small things. The sparkle of frost on a fallen branch, the delicate patterns forming on frozen puddles, the quiet thumping of your heartbeat in the cold air. Winter has a way of sharpening the senses. You hear more. You feel more. You notice more. And then between the trees you see it, a warm glow. At first it's just a hint of gold, flickering softly between the branches, but with each step it becomes clearer, brighter, warmer. The cabin is close. The forest around you seems to lean in, as if listening, as if watching your approach, but not in a frightening way, in a protective, almost gentle way. This part of the woods feels alive, but calm, as though it knows that tonight you're seeking something quiet, something grounding, something soft. Finally, you step into a small clearing. And there it is. A wooden cabin, simple but full of charm. Snow piles gently on its roof. A thin line of smoke rises from the chimney, curling into the darkening sky. The windows glow with warm yellow light, the kind of light that makes you think of blankets, hot tea, handwritten notes, and slow conversations. You pause for a moment, just looking at it. There is something comforting about this place, something familiar even if you've never been here before. It feels like a safe space, a small world where the pace is slower, where thoughts become clearer, where worries melt away like snow on warm skin. You take a step toward the cabin, and then another. Your cold fingers begin to warm just from the thought of the heat inside. Your shoulders drop naturally, releasing the tension you didn't even realize you were holding. By the time you reach the wooden door, the air around you is filled with a soft golden light seeping through the cracks. The smell of burning firewood reaches you first, rich, earthy, comforting. A sound follows, the faint crackle of flames dancing in the fireplace. You place your hand on the cabin door, the wood smooth and cool beneath your palm. And for a moment, the rest of the world fades. The cold outside becomes distant. The forest becomes quiet. Everything narrows down to this single moment, this single place, this single breath. Inside, a story is waiting. A winter evening is waiting. And someone looking for peace or clarity or just a moment of warmth, is already there. When you're ready, we'll open the door together and step into the heart of our winter cabin story. Before the story truly begins, let's step a little further inside this winter cabin. Not into the events yet, but into the atmosphere, the feeling, the emotional space where everything is about to unfold. Because sometimes, before a story starts, the place itself already holds a quiet kind of meaning. Imagine that you gently push the door open. It creaks softly, not loudly, not sharply, but in a friendly, familiar way, like an old house greeting someone it remembers. Warm air flows out to meet you, brushing against your face, thawing the cold from your cheeks. You step inside, and the door closes behind you with a comforting wooden thump. The first thing you notice is the fire. It crackles steadily in the stone fireplace, sending waves of heat into the room. Flames rise and fall, casting golden shadows along the walls. The scent of burning wood is rich and earthy, mixing with a faint aroma of pine from branches placed above the mantel. It's the kind of smell that instantly slows your heartbeat, the smell of safety, of warmth, of home, even if this place isn't yours. The cabin is small, but everything inside it feels intentional. A thick wool blanket lies folded neatly on a couch near the fire. A wooden table sits by a window with an old lantern resting quietly on top. Shelves line the far wall, not filled completely, but holding a few books, a ceramic mug, a jar of dried herbs, a pair of knitted gloves. Nothing here is extravagant. Nothing here is unnecessary. Every object seems to belong not because it's fancy, but because it carries a story, even if you don't know the details yet. Outside the window, snow continues to fall. The flakes drift slowly, illuminated by the moonlight. If you look closely, you can see the faint reflection of the fire dancing in the glass. It creates the illusion that the warmth inside the cabin extends into the forest, as if the whole world out there glows a little more softly, simply because this quiet, gentle space exists. You take a few steps deeper into the room. The wooden floor creaks softly beneath your feet. You feel the warmth from the fire on your skin, sinking in, loosening muscles you didn't realize were tense. Your shoulders drop. Your breath deepens. The stillness of the cabin wraps around you like a soft blanket. In the corner of the room, there is a small wooden desk. A candle burns there, a single flame, steady and calm. Beside it lies a notebook, closed, with a pencil resting on top. You notice the tiniest curl of wood shavings beside the pencil, as if someone had sharpened it only moments ago. The cabin is empty, but it doesn't feel lonely. It feels lived in, touched by someone who understands the value of quiet moments, someone who knows how to create a space where thoughts can land gently. And even though no one stands in the room with you now, their presence lingers, in the way the blanket is folded, in the way the candle burns, in the way the fire continues to crackle. Whoever was here last left the room full of warmth, as if expecting someone else to step inside and need it. You take a slow breath and let your eyes wander once more across the soft glow of the cabin. The world outside is cold, dark, and silent. But in here, everything is warm and alive. This is where our story begins. In a quiet cabin deep in a winter forest, in a room filled with gentle warmth and waiting light, with someone who came here seeking something they couldn't quite name. Now that you've arrived, the story is ready to unfold. When you're ready, we'll meet the person who came to this cabin and discover what brought them here on a winter night. The story begins on a late winter afternoon when the sky had already begun to fade into that deep, quiet shade of blue that appears only in the colder months. The forest was peaceful, untouched, except for a narrow path marked by careful steps. Those steps belonged to Lena, a young woman who had come to the cabin not for adventure, not for excitement, but for something far simpler and harder to define: silence. Lena had always loved winter. She loved its honesty, its simplicity, the way it stripped the world down to essentials. There was no noise demanding her attention, no rush pulling her in different directions, only the steady rhythm of snow falling softly around her. She came to this cabin every year, usually for just a few days, to breathe in the quiet and let her thoughts settle. This year, though, felt different. She had arrived earlier that day, pulling behind her a small wooden sled with a few supplies: food, a blanket, a lantern. The cabin belonged to her family, but no one had used it in years. It stood deep in the forest, a place untouched by the hurry of life, a place that always welcomed her without question. When she opened the door earlier, she felt the familiar wave of warmth spread through her chest, even before the fire was lit. The scent of wood, the memory of childhood summers and winters spent here. All of it wrapped around her gently, as though the cabin itself remembered her. Now, hours later, she sat near the fireplace, watching the flames dance. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of warm tea. Her boots, still dusted with snow, rested on the floor beside her. The soft crackling of the fire mixed with the distant hush of wind outside. She didn't come here running from something. But she didn't come empty either. For the past few months, Lena had felt a slow weight settle in her chest. Not sadness, not fear, just a quiet heaviness that made everything feel a little more tiring. She needed space. She needed rest. She needed a moment where the world stopped asking things of her. And the cabin didn't ask for anything? She took a sip of tea and let her eyes drift toward the small wooden desk in the corner. The candle she'd lit earlier burned steadily. Next to it lay an old notebook she found tucked between the books on the shelf. She hadn't opened it yet. Something about it felt personal, like it belonged to the cabin itself. For now, she simply watched the fire. The flames rose and fell in slow, gentle waves, casting warm, orange light across the room. Shadows stretched along the walls, moving softly with every flicker. Snow tapped lightly against the window, barely audible but present enough to make the room feel even cozier. Lena leaned back in her chair and exhaled deeply. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything she had been missing. Warmth, stillness, space to think or not think at all. The forest around her felt like a protective cocoon, keeping the rest of the world at a distance. Time felt different here, slower, more forgiving. For the first time in months, Lena felt her shoulders drop, her breath deepen, her mind begin to unclench. She didn't know exactly what she was hoping to find during her stay, but she sensed, quietly, deeply, that winter had something to offer her. Something gentle. Something she didn't know she needed. And as the wind whispered softly outside, the first chapter of her winter evening began. Night settled over the forest slowly, like a soft blanket being pulled across the sky. The blue evening deepened into a calm, velvety darkness, and the only light came from the fire inside the cabin and the pale moon above the treetops. Lena stood near the window, watching snow drift lazily past the glass. Each flake caught the light from the fire, turning into tiny sparks that appeared for a moment before melting into the shadows. She pressed her palm against the cold window pane, feeling the contrast between the winter outside and the warmth behind her. It reminded her of something she often forgot, that even in the coldest seasons, warmth can exist right alongside the chill. Her gaze shifted to the small wooden desk in the corner where the notebook still rested. She hesitated. Something about the notebook felt inviting, but she didn't want to rush into it. She turned away and walked back to the fire, sinking into the chair, letting its soft cushion hug her tired body. The silence of the cabin was complete, but not empty. It held the crackle of the fire, the whisper of snow at the window, the soft rhythm of her own breathing. It was the kind of silence she couldn't find anywhere else, the kind that allowed thoughts to float freely without pressure or noise. Lena reached for her mug of tea and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through her chest, bringing with it a quiet clarity. She set the mug down and let her eyes drift back to the desk. Maybe it was time. Maybe the notebook waited for her as much as she waited for a sign, any sign, that she was ready to let go of the heaviness she'd been carrying. She stood and walked across the room, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. The candle flickered gently as she approached. Its flame reflected in the notebook's cover, making it look almost alive, as if it breathed with the room. Lena sat down, pulled the notebook closer, and opened it. The first page greeted her with a short, simple sentence. "If you've come here seeking quiet, you're in the right place." She smiled softly, surprised by how comforting those words felt. She turned the page. Another line, handwritten in ink that had faded slightly over the years. "This cabin has held many winters. It understands the weight people bring with them." She blinked. The words were gentle, observant, almost as if the writer knew exactly what she was feeling. Lena turned another page. Sometimes we don't need answers, we just need space to hear our own hearts again. A slow breath escaped her. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been holding everything inside until the words loosened it, just a little. She closed the notebook halfway, holding it between her hands, feeling its warmth from the candle beside it. Who wrote this? She wondered. A family member? A stranger who stayed here long ago? Someone who had also searched for quiet in the middle of winter? The identity didn't matter. What mattered was that the words were here now, speaking to her in a way no conversation had done in months. She flipped to the back of the notebook, curious if it was filled completely. But the final pages were blank, untouched, waiting. A thought came to her quietly. Maybe these pages weren't only for reading. Maybe they were meant for writing, too. She picked up the pencil laying beside the notebook, its wood slightly warm from the candle's glow. She hesitated, unsure of what to write, but then she let her hand move on its own, allowing her thoughts to form naturally. Thank you. I didn't know how much I needed these words. She stared at the sentence. It felt small, simple, but true. Closing the notebook gently, she returned it to the desk and let the candle burn beside it. The room felt warmer somehow, as if her writing had added something quiet but real to the space. Lena stepped back toward the fire and wrapped the wool blanket around her shoulders. She sank into her chair, listening to the flames whisper and pop. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt a sense of release, a soft unwinding inside her chest. Winter had brought her here for a reason. And for the first time, she felt ready to discover what that reason might be. The next morning greeted Lena with a soft silver light. She woke slowly, wrapped in the thick wool blanket she had pulled around herself the night before. For a moment, she stayed still, listening. The cabin was quiet, but not silent. It breathed with the gentle creaks of wood settling in the cold and the low hum of wind brushing against the walls. Outside, snow continued to fall in a steady rhythm, not a storm, but a calm, endless drizzle of white. Lena sat up and rubbed her hands together, warming them before stepping toward the window. The forest looked different in the daylight. Less mysterious, but somehow more magical. The tall pines stood proudly beneath their crowns of snow, and the ground stretched in soft, unbroken waves of white. It was the kind of view that made her feel both small and completely connected at the same time. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat near the fireplace. The embers still glowed faintly, so she added a few logs and watched the flames grow. Fire had a language of its own, slow, soothing, steady. Watching it felt like listening to a story told without words. Her eyes drifted to the desk again. The notebook sat where she had left it, closed, silent, and yet full of presence, as if it were waiting, not demanding, not calling, just waiting quietly, patiently. She approached it again, not because she needed more answers, but because she felt drawn to the sense of companionship the notebook offered. She opened it to the page where she had written her own message the night before. The words stared back at her. "Thank you. I didn't know how much I needed these words." She traced the sentence lightly with her finger, then turned the page. To her surprise, the next page wasn't blank. A new line, written in the same faded ink as the others, appeared on the page. "Quiet places don't heal us. We heal because we finally stop running long enough to feel." Lena froze. She knew, absolutely knew, that this line had not been there the night before. She had checked the empty pages. There was nothing. A soft shiver ran through her, but not from fear. It was the feeling of something unexpected, something gentle and almost magical, unfolding in a way she could not explain. She read the line again, her chest tightening, her breath catching softly in her throat. Those words felt too accurate.
Too close.
Too perfectly timed to be a coincidence. She looked around the cabin, her eyes moving across the fire, the window, the shelves, the blankets. Nothing was out of place. Nothing suggested someone had been inside during the night. And yet the evidence was right in front of her, written in soft, steady handwriting. Lena sat slowly, as if her body wanted to move carefully through this moment. Whoever had written in the notebook, whenever they had done it, seemed to understand something about her that she hadn't spoken aloud. She turned the page again. Another new line appeared. "You're not here by accident." Lena exhaled shakily. A warmth spread through her chest, but it wasn't from the fire. It was something softer, deeper. A feeling of being seen, understood, gently held by an invisible presence that wanted nothing from her except honesty. She closed the notebook, holding it against her chest. The room felt different now. Not magical, not strange, just fuller. As if the cabin itself had become aware of her, aware of what she carried, aware of the quiet healing she had come here seeking. Lena walked back to the fireplace and sat down on the floor beside it. The heat warmed her skin, loosening the tension in her shoulders. Outside, the snowfall thickened, moving with a peaceful steadiness that made the world beyond the cabin blur softly into white. She realized something then. The cabin wasn't offering answers. It was offering space. And in that space, her thoughts could finally land gently, without pressure or judgment. She looked back at the desk one more time. The candle flickered lightly, its flame a quiet companion. Whatever was happening here, it didn't frighten her. It comforted her. Something, or someone, had left words for her. Words she didn't know she needed until she saw them. And deep inside, she felt that this was only the beginning. Lena spent the rest of the morning moving slowly through the cabin, as if she were learning to breathe at a different pace. She added wood to the fire, warmed her hands around her cup, listened to the soft rhythm of the snow outside. Everything felt softer now. The light, the silence, even her own thoughts. But the notebook. The notebook stayed on her mind. By midday, the snowfall had thickened, turning the forest outside into a world of white. The sky looked painted with gentle brushstrokes, the trees standing still under their snowy crowns. Lena wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and returned to the desk. The notebook sat waiting, quiet and patient. She opened it once more, flipping through the pages she had already read. Words about winter. Words about stillness. Words about healing. Words she had not written, yet felt written for her. She reached the page with the newest message. You're not here by accident. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. The meaning was simple, but it filled her with warmth and tears she didn't realize she had been holding back. She turned to the next blank page and wrote slowly, I don't know why I'm here, but something brought me. She paused, pencil hovering above the paper. A part of her felt silly, writing messages into a notebook no one might ever see. But another part, the part that had softened since she arrived, trusted the quiet magic of this place. She closed the notebook and stepped outside for air. The cold hit her cheeks gently, almost tenderly. Everything was silent except for the soft hush of falling snow. The forest felt alive in a peaceful way, not watching her, not judging, just holding space. Lena walked a few steps into the clearing and looked up at the sky. Snowflakes brushed her eyelashes, melting into tiny drops. She exhaled slowly, watching her breath drift into the air. For the first time in months, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She didn't feel lost. She didn't feel the weight that had followed her through her days. She felt present. Here. Exactly where she was. When she returned to the cabin, something instantly felt different. A faint glow came from the desk. Not bright, not supernatural, just a warm shimmer from the candle that hadn't been lit when she stepped outside. Lena blinked in confusion. She was sure she had blown it out earlier. Yet now it flickered softly, as if someone had relit it while she was gone. Her heart beat faster, not in fear, but in recognition. She walked toward the desk slowly. The notebook was open. Open to a new page. Her breath caught as she saw the fresh handwriting inside. Sometimes we find the place we need before we understand why we need it. Lena sat down, her hands trembling slightly from emotion. She touched the words lightly with her fingertips, as if trying to feel the warmth behind them. A second line followed. It's okay not to have the answers yet. A soft sound escaped her, half a laugh, half a sigh, half a quiet release of something she had held too tightly for too long. She closed her eyes, letting the meaning sink deeper into her. When she opened them again, she noticed something at the edge of the desk, a small object she hadn't seen before. A wooden charm, shaped like a tiny cabin. Simple. Hand-carved. Warm from the candle beside it. She picked it up slowly. On the back, carved in small letters, were the words, "For your journey home." Lena held the charm in her hand, feeling a wave of emotion rise in her chest. A quiet gratitude, a soft ache, a warmth that spread through her entire body. She didn't know who had written in the notebook. She didn't know who had carved the charm. She didn't know how the candle had been lit, or whether these messages were from someone long gone, someone nearby, or simply the gentle magic of a place that understood hearts better than people did. But she knew one thing with certainty. She wasn't alone. Not in the cabin. Not in her thoughts. Not in her quiet search for peace. Winter had given her something she hadn't known she was missing. A reminder that healing doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in warmth, in stillness. In a notebook left open on a wooden desk. Lena pressed the small charm to her chest and let her eyes close. The cabin crackled softly with firelight. The forest breathed quietly outside, and inside her, something finally began to heal. My friends, thank you for staying with me through this quiet winter journey. Before we close today's episode, I want to leave you with a moment of reflection. A gentle pause in your day, a soft space to breathe after the story we just shared. The cabin in our story may be far away, hidden deep in the forest, covered in snow and silence. But the feeling it gives us is something we can carry anywhere. A feeling of warmth, a feeling of stillness, a feeling of being held quietly by a moment we didn't expect. Lena didn't come to the cabin searching for magic or answers or even transformation. She came simply because something inside her was tired. And sometimes that is all it takes. A small step toward quiet, a small retreat from noise, a small pause from trying to be everything for everyone. In that space, healing doesn't rush. It doesn't push. It simply arrives, softly, like snow falling on a silent night. And that is one of winter's greatest gifts. It slows the world just enough for us to notice ourselves again. It invites us to listen, not to the noise around us, but to the gentle voice inside that often gets lost during busy seasons of life. Maybe like Lena, you've carried something heavy. Maybe you've been moving too fast. Maybe you've forgotten what it feels like to truly rest. But here, in this moment, listening to this story, you allowed yourself to pause. You gave yourself time. You gave yourself space. And that is something to be proud of. Learning English can feel like a long journey, full of new words, new sounds, new challenges. But it doesn't always need to be difficult. Sometimes the best learning happens when you are calm, present, and simply listening with an open heart. Stories have a way of teaching us without effort. They bring meaning, emotion, imagination, all the things that make language come alive. So if this episode brought you even a small moment of comfort, a moment of quiet, a moment where the world felt a little softer, then I am grateful. Because these moments matter. They remind us that growth doesn't always come from pushing harder. Sometimes it comes from slowing down. Before we end, I want you to take one more deep breath. In and out. Feel your shoulders relax. Feel the warmth inside you, even if the world outside is cold. And remember that peace is always closer than it seems, sometimes just a breath, a step, or a quiet story away. If you enjoyed this winter episode, don't forget to subscribe to English Unlocked. Together, we'll continue exploring gentle stories, slow English listening, and moments of calm that help you grow, not through pressure, but through presence. Thank you for listening. Thank you for learning with me. And thank you for sharing this soft winter evening, this quiet cabin, this peaceful moment. Until next time, my friends, stay warm, stay kind to yourself, and let winter remind you how beautiful it can be to slow down. Goodbye for now.